There's a spiritual crisis in our country right now, and it's causing people to turn on one another. There's a sense on both sides of the political spectrum that the American dream has been stolen. Michael Gerson wrote about this in the Washington Post recently, how one side believes that the American dream, that is the promise of prosperity and financial success available to every American, has been stolen by Wall Street bankers and the 1% of the wealthiest Americans who donate the most to political campaigns and who benefit the most from the current economy. And the other side thinks it's immigrants, the Mexican government, or our Chinese competitors who have stolen the American dream. On one end of the political spectrum, Donald Trump has said the American dream is dead. On the other, Bernie Sanders has said, for many, the American dream has become a nightmare. There are huge differences in opinion about what has caused the problem, but there is strong bipartisan support on the far left and the far right that what our country stands for and promises is broken. And that each one has identified a group of people that they blame for the theft of our nation's dream. When I say this is a spiritual problem, you might say, no, come on, Marlin, this is an economic and a political problem, but it's both. The profound changes in our global and national economy, including the incredibly increasing disparity of the distribution of wealth in our country, and the way that these changes have created a situation in which, for the first time in our nation's history, one generation is no longer likely to be able to do better economically than the previous generation, despite hard work and education. At the same time, the increased influence of money in politics leaves people feeling that the system will forever be rigged toward the wealthy at the expense of working and middle-class Americans. Now, my point in mentioning all this is to say that there is a lot of anxiety in American society right now. And when there is anxiety and insecurity, it's easy to start turning on one another. This is where the spiritual crisis begins. If we allow ourselves to turn on our fellow human beings, and especially on entire groups of people, we create a very treacherous and even history shows deadly divide. As Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Or as it says in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 25, Jesus said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. The thing is that it is so much easier for most people to point a finger at immigrants or the wealthy and to make some visible, tangible group into the explanation and as a scapegoat for the real problems that we face as we deal with the changes and the instabilities of the global economy. The problem with this divisive and finger-pointing approach is that it is overly simplistic, and it's bad economic analysis, and it leads to social division and spiritual deprivation. Since most people find it easier to blame a group of people rather than to try to comprehend the incredibly complex problems of our global economic infrastructure, we have politicians who unfortunately are able to stir up a lot of passion when they personalize the problem and in turn turn us on each other. The most well-known and extreme example of this, of course, was Adolf Hitler in World War II who blamed and scapegoated the Jews for Germany's problems. He said, we're a great nation and a great people, and he promised to rid the country of Jews and make Germany great again. When we fall prey to division-based politics, we not only turn on others, we turn on ourselves, and we demean our very spirits and the spirit of this nation. So let me bring this to a personal level, because it all begins in our hearts and in our minds. One of the core spiritual principles at stake here is the fact that we are not in control of most aspects of our lives. There are quite a few parts of being alive that we do have some control over, but the most profound aspects of living we do not control. When we die, how we will die, what family we are born or adopted into. Our biological heritage is not something that we control. Most world events, wars, crimes, corruption, economic changes, natural disasters, random violence. There's a lot more in life that we do not control than the parts that we do. Religion and spirituality are one of the ways that people deal with being alive in a world over which we have very little control. One of the ways that our lack of control affects us is fear of the unknown. We often don't know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, to whom it's going to happen. What we do know is that fear of the unknown is also the cause of prejudice and human division and a lot of other forms of violence. When I think about my own ability to appreciate or not appreciate diversity or differences, I realize how much of it has to do with how I'm feeling about myself on any given day. Here's an example I heard from a colleague some years ago, which I can relate to very well. He described how he was at a bank one day. He was feeling good. It was his day off. He was not in a hurry. He had just had lunch with a good friend. It had been a hard but very productive week. He was depositing his paycheck, and he was glad to be in the black financially. Life was going pretty well. And when he made it to the counter, the teller was a woman with the longest painted nails he had ever seen. Not only that, they were decorated with stripes in different colors, including gold, and each one had a shining fake jewel glued onto it. He found himself admiring her nails and wondering with delightful curiosity who she was, what kind of person she was, what kind of life she had, an upbringing. Now, such dramatic nails were not something that he, as a middle-class white man, was used to seeing. None of his immediate friends or family adorned themselves in such a way. But he thought to himself, in that moment, how cool it is that this world is full of all kinds of different people, doing different things, looking differently, finding beauty and interest in different ways. Right there in the bank, he was wrapped in joy and appreciation of the wonder of diversity. Then he fast forwards 2 weeks later. In the midst of a terrible week in which he was struggling with the board president over some decisions in the church, and he was feeling powerless and dispirited. The stress of the church was also affecting his life at home. And you can ask Anitra if you want to know what it's like when things are not going well here at church, how I act when I'm at home, and it's not always pretty. It's hard to leave y'all at the office when I go home. So in the midst of this incredible stressful week, into my colleague's office walked a woman who came to see him about a pastoral concern. She arrived dressed in what could be described, or as he described it, as a very sexy outfit, and he immediately noticed her nails. They were long and painted with fancy designs, and there was a fake jewel glued onto each one of them. And as she sat there telling him about her personal and her financial problems, he could not help but noticing himself thinking things like, boy, if she would just stop wasting her money on fake nails and manicures and shopping for glitzy purses and makeup, she might not have all these problems. There he was, questioning her very values, finding fault in her way of being. And in his reflection on these two encounters, my colleague admitted that when he was feeling fulfilled and secure and in touch with his own personal power and his own sense of security, he finds himself so much more open to appreciating the wide differences of people all around him. But when he finds himself feeling needy and insecure and powerless, he just as easily becomes critical and judgmental. So what this story reminds me of is that we have to be so aware about what's going on inside of us when we find ourselves being critical or judgmental or pointing our fingers at others. We need to ask, how am I feeling about myself right now? Because when we're low, feeling needy, feeling insecure, it's so easy and so common to turn it on someone else. And politicians and religious leaders can and often do try to satisfy people's spiritual and physical need for security and control by offering simplistic versions of the world that cause people to turn on other people. I'm going to say that again. Political and religious leaders can and often do try to satisfy people's spiritual and physical needs for security and control by offering simplistic versions of the world that cause people to turn on one another. Here's an example from religion. If a person feels secure in his or her own values and religious views, it's so much easier for that person to accept other people's approaches to religion. So someone like me who feels good about how I approach my religious life, obviously I've made a career of it, can enjoy and even appreciate the Hindu approach to religion, for example, and become fascinated by the multicolored representations of gods. But if I believe that there's only one right way to God, and the Hindus have another way, then either they are wrong or I am wrong. And if my belief makes salvation contingent on my being right, then their religion is a threat. Then I am compelled to either prove them wrong or convert them or destroy them, or to warn others that their approach to God is dangerous. Now, when these feelings are instigated or encouraged in someone who has a propensity for violence, then we can end up with religious terrorism or political fascism. People feel that they must obliterate those who are wrong in order to save those who are right. They need to remove those who are unworthy in order to save those who are worthy. It's a spiritual condition. It's a spiritual disease. Here's a social example. If you think gay marriage is going to destroy heterosexual marriage, you might be likely to fight against it. But most people who are secure in their marriages, secure in their sexuality, are not afraid or feel gay marriage is a threat. Now, I've just given political example. I've given a personal example, religious example, and a social example of how our sense of insecurity and our fear of the unknown causes people to turn on one another. It's a spiritual disease. It's a spiritual condition, and we have to watch ourselves. So I'm going to go back for a second to the story of the Tower of Babel from the book of Genesis. Good, we all know that now. Because it has some important thing to teach us in this regard. The Jewish rabbis have a midrash, which is a commentary on this story, that claims that as the tower grew in height, it took 1 year to bring bricks from the base all the way up to the upper stories. So the bricks became, as David said earlier, more precious than people. When a brick slipped and fell, the people wept. When a person slipped and fell, people paid little attention. In other words, the goal of building the tower, the goal of building the city, the goal of building the nation became more important than the people who they were building it for. As we continue to take the next steps to build a more perfect union here in the United States, even in these insecure times, may we never turn on each other as a way of trying to solve our problems. Let's not embrace easy answers nor support politicians who would stir us to demonize others. That's not just about doing the right thing for the country, it's about doing the right thing for our own soul. May we find deep unity amidst our diversity, and may we learn to celebrate and to cherish one another. United we stand, divided we fall. Amen.
We are your church, and we are proud to be your church, or at least a church that's having a positive impact on your life. I am personally blessed to be your minister, or at least a minister who you're allowing to speak into your life. I hope you'll support our ministry and share your love beyond belief by texting LOVEBB to 41444 or go to our website. But you can just text LOVEBB to 41444 and make your gift. It's wonderful. Thank you. Be blessed and be a blessing.